Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by two really impressive guests, Wendy White and Jaime Romero. Wendy has the agile mindset of a startup CMO combined with the broad operational and financial depth of an F100 executive. As a high-tech marketing expert, her business acumen combined with her technical expertise is a 1-2 punch. Wendy drives tangible business, revenue, and brand results, transforms and revitalizes teams, builds marketing functions from the ground up, and leads through change. Jaime is a data-driven and people-centric marketing leader with a focus on business outcomes. Currently, Vice President of Corporate Marketing at Fortinet, driving brand and demand. With over 15 years of marketing experience, Jaime builds high-performing marketing teams and is constantly on the look for great talent. Wendy, Jaime, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome. I am so excited to have you guys and to talk to both of you. I know you're kind of on opposing sides of our topic today, but before we jump into that, I always like to break the ice with a woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So Wendy, I will start with you. What buzzword would you like to banish forever?
All right, I'm going to pick one that is related to dark funnel and, not knowing where your customers are coming from, which is self-attribution.
Yeah, that one is one that every time I've heard, I'm like, what does that really mean?
Well, I kind of equate it to being like a eyewitness in a crime. It's never quite what it seems.
That's a good analogy. So we're going to put the eyewitness in the box, and we are not going to talk about self-attribution. Okay, Jaime, what about you?
So the one thing I've seen, I don't know if it's not necessarily a buzzword, but I hear on LinkedIn a lot people talking about, B2B companies becoming media agencies or media companies because of the content we're putting out there. And I just don't necessarily agree with that. I do think content marketing is important. I think companies need to be forward thinking and thought leaders in their industries. But I think the business of being a media company is not the business of a software company or whatever business or market you're selling into. So I think that's changing that mindset has to go.
So what are you saying? Like media is not the new content marketing? Is that not the thing? Yeah, that is one that I do hear a lot. And it's like, yeah, just because you do certain things that are related to media doesn't make you a media company. Just like we have sales that occasionally does marketing activities, and we know that doesn't make them a marketer. So we will put both of those into the box. And we, at least for this conversation, won't talk about self-attribution or becoming a media company. So now that we've gotten that off our chest, we are going to kind of battle it out when it comes to gated versus non-gated. And I think this is a conversation, being a consultant, I work with a lot of different marketing leaders. And this is one of those things that they're like, we should gate everything because we're doing all this work. And if we don't gate it, what happens then? And, a lot of the industry reports are saying like, no, you should not gate anything. And, if you put it out there, people will come. And it's always a really uncomfortable conversation that tends to be really polarizing. So I will start by asking each of you for an intention. It gives us focus, it gives us purpose, and most important, it helps our audience know what you would like them to take away from the conversation. So Jaime, I'll let you start this time. What is your best intention for our discussion?
Yeah, so I'm on Team Gate because I definitely believe in particular, in my experience, a B2B marketing organization, your job on your website is to drive, I don't want to call them leads, but qualified interest and prospects to a sales organization. I also qualify that with, I'm not a 100% gate everything. I think there's a balance as in with all things, and I've got data and stuff we could talk about, but definitely lean more towards gating than not gating.
All right, Wendy?
I'm going to say, I see where you're coming from, but I'm going to throw it out there and say gating is dangerous. And what I mean by that is gating leads to vanity MQL metrics and behavior in marketing teams that can be problematic to really creating demand.
Okay, so now we have taken our stance. And so my question would be, in relation to, and I think, Wendy, you started down that path in terms of what marketing can measure. I do think that the reason people started gating everything is because that becomes a clear conversion point and a little bit of a pat on the back for marketing to say, yep, we did it. We did a good thing. And so it seems like we started off well-intentioned. So Wendy, without the gated content, so going to an open model, what do you see as the right way to measure those that you're driving to you?
Yeah. So, back to the, I see Jaime's point. I actually do believe you should gate a few very high intent, high value assets. Where I really see problems in marketing funnels and in marketing execution is when marketing teams gate everything for essentially, list acquisition. And I can understand where this started 10 years ago, the whole HubSpot inbound marketing engine, and we were all believers of it. But you know what? Today I can get those same names for 20 cents. I don't need to put something in content syndication. I don't need to put a gate in front of it to know who you are. So for me, what I'm trying really to do is get hand raisers, people who want to talk to us, who are willing to come and raise their hand on our site and saying, I want to have a conversation with you, versus us having them fill out a form for an asset and then shooting the BDR to give them a call.
Okay. Jaime, you got a good response for that one?
Yeah. I mean, I want to start with what you said, though, about the reason behind gating, about driving these vanity metrics and patting ourselves on the back. And I think that is probably true for a lot of organizations, a lot of marketers. My point of view on that, however, is total opposite. Like, I don't care about the vanity metrics. I don't care about pretending I'm doing a good job. And I think it boils down to a really strong sales and marketing alignment and alignment towards the outcomes. So, in every job I've ever had, and especially at Fortinet and the BDR team we have here, we are 100% aligned on the business outcomes and what they want to see from marketing. So it's not so much we delivered X amount of MQLs or SQLs, good job marketing. It's what were the outcome of these MQLs and SQLs, and is that delivering the business drivers? Are those the business drivers? Are we measuring the right things to drive those outcomes?
100%. I think the marketing has to think of themselves as the part of the revenue engine, and their accountabilities are pipeline and revenue. As long as you're starting there, a lot of the bad behaviors around vanity MQLs won't get started in your business, because you'll be looking at those MQLs and how they actually move through the funnel. And that may be a good indicator of what kind of things to stop. I mean, Brandi, as an example, I took over marketing at a company, and I would say 80 to 90% of their content was gated, including things like their data sheets or their product guides, right? That were content that allowed that conversation to get started with the customer, to let them put you into their consideration set. You gate that content, and you kind of eliminate yourself from the conversation in a lot of ways with customers who might have considered you if they could have done that research on their own.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, going back to the being a media company comment, right? I think a lot of the non-gating philosophies stem from, I want to put as much content as I can out in the world so people see me as this thought leader. And I think where that misses a step is, you think as a marketer, your content's so good that you think you're creating this unbiased point of view that a consumer says, oh, I want to learn about this thing, so I'm going to go to this vendor who has a very specific agenda. Let me go see what they have to say and decide that that's going to be my normal. So I think naturally people are going to go to companies' content and say, this is written by this company who obviously has a vested interest in seeing this agenda move forward. So I'm going to take it's good stuff, right? But I'm going to take that with its bias and adjust for it. I think the foundation of this non-gating movement came from, in part, that to say, I want to be a media company. I want to open up and create this relationship, this community of consumers, meaning B2B buyers, that when they need information, they're going to come to me. And I think where the gating content strategy, the non-gating content strategy falls short is transitioning that into, I need to have a conversation with my sales team and have a meaningful sales conversation in terms of the company's actual problems. So that's why I think gating is a big step in that conversation cycle.
I want to dig in. I know, Wendy, in your initial response, you talked about, that you do support gating where it's high intent, high value. And I hear that statement a lot. And where I see the problem come in is how that gets interpreted. Yeah. Because, and although I don't personally agree, the argument that I've heard repeatedly of why you gate the data sheets and these sort of things is because those are the things that tell us they're interested in buying. So if they want it, I need to know who they are, which in my opinion is the self-serving, like, I need to know who they are so I can sell to them. But how do you, and Jaime, since you are team gate assets, how do you really define what is high intent, what is high value? Because those two words can be really subjective. So for those listening who are kind of on the fence trying to figure out where they need to sit and what they need to gate, can either of you give a more tangible definition of what's my litmus test of, do I put a form in front of this or do I not?
Yeah, I mean, I could start. So for me, it's really about what's driving the demand. So for example, a Gartner Magic Quadrant. I'm in the tech space. Those are really big, important assets that people will look for and help dictate and drive a sales cycle. To me, that's something that's an easy, like, I'm going to gate it. Things like data sheets, I agree. I don't think we gate our data sheets. I'm going to say 99% certainty we don't, but that's super early in a buyer journey. I don't think data sheets are something you're looking at when you're really at the end making a decision. I mean, you are to a certain degree, but when you're comparing models and stuff, doing your pre-sales research, a lot of that stuff, you have to draw a line where you create enough interest that the prospect wants to talk to sales to learn more. And there's almost like a diminishing return by continuing to put all this content, and you're just going to paralyze them, say, there's no need for me to talk to sales. I got what I needed. But the risk there is they're interpreting what you're putting out there through their own lens. And a lot of times prospects think they know what they want, and they know they have a problem. They think they know the solution based on this other media company's content that they might have read. And it's like people forget the definition of sales. It's right to convince a prospect to buy your stuff. So, giving your sales team those at bats, I think, is hugely important. Even if the prospect doesn't think they're going to buy your stuff, or they don't know enough about you, they normally would not have called you because they might have discounted you right from the beginning. Getting them in front of the right salesperson at the right time, they might be like, oh, I didn't know that about your company. Definitely, let me dig in a little bit more. And that's where I think putting the gates at the right spot, at the right position of the sales cycle with the right assets introduces and is the catalyst for those kinds of conversations.
Okay, so we're more similar than distant probably on this, which is a good thing, right? I mean, like we both want to be, great marketers, and we want to be providing a great brand experience and a great buyer's journey experience. So I agree with that. Some areas I've seen this go awry, putting a gate in front of an asset, and then on the thank you page offering another asset, and oops, a second gate, because all those type of assets are gated. I've seen this in the journey, and unfortunately I've lived this in marketing teams that I've managed where I've had to go in and unwind this. So I think being thoughtful about, as Jaime said, about what is the journey that audience is on, how can I create a great compelling brand experience through that gating, including maybe not delivering, a PDF that you can only get on one page and then you have to refill the form out to get it again, or that you can't download and forward to other folks in your team. Because part of the reason why I use gates is because that content is so rich and so meaningful that the person will want to share it with others inside their company. It's like such a meaningful piece, and for me as a CMO, it's a learning piece that I might share with my team, or, the buyer might share with others on their buying committee, like making that a seamless, great, easy experience.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit because you also touched on list acquisition, because that is, the core is we need the form so that we know who they are, so that we can craft a journey, determine, when we feel like they should be in front of sales, when marketing needs to communicate. And yes, I do agree that there are ways that you can buy those same contacts. But when we get into, email is still a really core part of nurture. You can't email when you're buying lists because there's some compliance things. There's a lot of caveats to, yes, the data exists and it's not difficult to get your hands on, but there are some drawbacks to just kind of going in cold when you're buying lists. So how do you, if you're not using forms, and it is, most B2B is going to be a little bit longer of a sales cycle, so it's not transactional. How do you compensate for, the inability to really have people to talk to nurture when you're not capturing, many contacts?
Yeah, I think the answer to this could be very different if you have a SMB kind of focused buyer versus an enterprise focused buyer. So for me, I think about those funnels as very different. And I've have companies that I work for, that I manage, that are both buyers, where, you go to both ends of the market. And the enterprise space, we're very much trying to focus on making relationships with accounts, knowing who those people are, using intent data on our site, our friends over at 6 Sense or some other company like that, to know what accounts are coming, and through as much of, deductions we can, know who's coming, and, have a personalized outreach to them. I think that's probably a best practice for most B2B enterprise companies. I think your point, Brandi, is super relevant for down market, where it's an SMB motion. You don't know who's at the other end of the wire, right? I'm suffering through that right now. So again, back to team gated and ungated, I actually might try to have a lot more, not being a media company, but a lot more publishing for that SMB audience, where I am using good, interesting key gates around stuff that they could be interested to go figure out who they are. Because list building is still important. I think we're all probably trying to straddle, what does, GDPR, CCPA mean for how we acquire names and nurture them, where we use BDRs versus marketing automation. And, especially in like a like big mass marketing audience, like an SMB audience, that's particularly challenging. There is zero doubt.
Yeah, I think adding to that, specifically, well, I think there's two components to that. There's the list building piece, but then there's the explicit opt-in. And you can build your list and not get the opt-in, which, in EMEA and Canada and so on makes it, you still can't email them, which is still probably the number one form of communication for businesses. In the US, we have a little bit more flexibility. I hope that will change at some point one day, and legislation will be nationalized where we can have a standard email policy, and one that's not by state. But yeah, I think gating allows you to collect those opt-ins. I still don't know that the opt-in and list building conversation is still tied to the gating strategy. I think there's more that can be done to build a list and drive opt-ins that are independent of your gating strategy, because I just don't know that the volume is high enough to build a meaningful database or have meaningful database growth and opt-in growth if you're going to solely depend on gating. So I think when you're thinking about list acquisition and your opt-in strategy, there needs to be a lot more that goes into that in terms of blog subscribers and things like that.
Which is interesting, because I do know that most people do, or many, I won't say most, that many do tie, not as gating as their only list building strategy, but a key component of it. Yeah. And so it is interesting to think about just really uncoupling those two things together and actually thinking about them separately, because that may lead to different decisions. If we're not really thinking of gating as a list building tool, then you may become more team ungate. And Wendy, I think you hit on a good point that I'd like to hear you both dig into is from an ABM. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing that you just said. If you're in marketing and list building and data and contact acquisition is not a priority for you, I mean, specifically around B2B marketing, then I can't think of any company or any scenario where building your database should not be one of your number one priorities.
Well, if you follow some of the influencers on LinkedIn, I would say that, there's a few that like to do a lot of videos that don't believe that should be part of your strategy. And I also agree. I don't see how you get away with that. Not everybody's going to raise their hand at the appropriate moment. And you do want to make sure that anybody who is in market or thinking about being in market, you are touching. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's important, social's important, but it's not an owned asset. You don't own your audience there. You have to find a way to build a direct channel of communication to your audience. And again, that to the back to gated, ungated. Gated is a strategy to do that. Yeah. And if you're not building your database as a B2B organization, maybe in consumer it might be a little different and your social is your main route to market, sure. But in B2B, that's if you're doing that without considering building your own database, because that's an asset that grows over time,
Yes. And that's really what I was getting at, in that is why I think most people tie their form strategy with their list building strategy, because the form strategy is, not the only way, but a key way to drive that list. And generally, at least from data that I've seen, they tend to be more engaged that way. Like if I look at people that come from content syndication and paid media, like those are the people that they get on your list and they are far less likely to actually do anything after. But when they are filling out your forms or, online events, whether it's webinars or bigger virtual events, those tend to be the people that stay engaged with future communications, are a little more receptive to, when your BDRs are calling them. And so that's why I've always seen that as like a really joint thought process.
I agree with that, but I think the really important thing, and we danced around a little bit, is like what to gate and what happens with the content. And this goes back to quality is incredibly important. if you're a sophisticated, selling to a sophisticated B2B audience, hiring a junior set of content marketers producing stuff that dance around your topic and throw it out in like a media company. Jamie, it's like your media company one came up like 6 times. We did not avoid it. Right? If you're doing that and then you're gating an asset and you break trust by behind that gate is a poorly conceived non-important piece of content. You're breaking trust with your audience, and you're actually sending them the opposite way from consuming your content going forward. And content is the permission to have a conversation. That's what it is. It has to be great.
Yeah, and I think the content strategy is another place that people struggle, and that also leads to the form strategy not working well. Because you are right. If you're not producing anything worthy, anything that is high value, high intent, then you don't really have anything to gate. But I won't go down the content marketing path. That is a current soapbox.
I think we just have to assume, if we're talking gating, non-gating, at least between the three of us, we assume the content is as good as we judge it to be.
But I do want to talk about ABM a little bit, because I do agree that putting like where you are seeing intent in an account, that for enterprise companies, that it is going to be more of a relationship push. But what I've been seeing lately is, with so many companies having layoffs, reduction in their sales team size, that the same kind of motions, and it's been large companies that have been, having these reductions. It's like the same kind of motions that were previously possible don't seem as feasible. And so from the conversations I've been a part of, they are then looking to the marketing teams to say, how do you feed us more of the right relationships so that the smaller team of people that we have can, explore where there's really some opportunity. And so to me, that is where gating plays a big role, is if I, as a marketer, can get more people in and nurture them and at least be able to show, okay, there's more than just a pulse here, that can help me to help sales to prioritize. And so that's one place where on the enterprise side, I do lean towards not like over gating, but a heavier gating strategy is when you don't have the people resources to lean into that.
For me, I guess first question on that, because ABM is a whole nother thing, is really how you're defining ABM. I like to define ABM in a more narrow point of view, the one-to-one or one-to-few philosophy, in terms of picking your accounts and then, creating custom marketing strategies around those accounts. And in those instances, I actually disagree, because if you're creating a very targeted promotion against a very targeted account, you actually don't need gating, number one, because there's enough technology to track everything. Mm-hmm. And number two, your metric for success is not about converting that whatever into a download of a whatever content. It's really about the engagement, how many people you're engaging at an account. So I tend to, from an ABM perspective, I think gating goes the opposite direction than you describe, in terms of like the metrics around success for an ABM engagement when you're collaborating between sales and an ABM marketer is really more about pure engagement and less downloads, because you're capturing the downloads already. And if you think about it from a goals perspective, when you're talking about gating, broadly speaking, marketing at scale, it's about getting that account to provide you with the catalyst to have that sales conversation. Whereas ABM, you're pushing out this content to influence and to support your salesperson into calling into that account to start having those conversations. So you don't need the gated content to be the catalyst to have that sales conversation. You're just trying to push and push and push and shape and influence as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think what you really just hit on for me is the fact that the term ABM, and I do think someone banished that during another episode, but that the term ABM has been, it's become synonymous with when we are going after target accounts. Because as I'm thinking about the conversations I've had, it has not been the one to few. It's here's the 1,000 accounts that we're, trying to go after this year. And that is how they're defining few, because, maybe their TAM is 10,000, but like this year, we're going after these 1,000 or these 500. And so, yeah, I do think I'm using the term ABM, but really, really loosely. And that's where I do think there is more of an issue, because you don't have the salespeople. Whereas if it is few, then, resourcing isn't the same. Wendy, it looked like you were going to say something.
Well, I just want to say, so we said we were going to come here and duke it out, but man, I love Jaime because I adore you, man, because we think so much alike about these issues, right? I mean, like the strategic use of gating, the not gating on a one-to-few, one-to-one relationship in ABM, 100%. Remove that friction, build trust, build relationship, use your content for conversations, engage that account. Love it. Love it.
So here I am trying to pick a fight, and we got a whole kumbaya moment. No, I really, my goal, because I get asked this so much, really was to give some different perspective. And I think you guys really hit on some key points, which is, gating isn't bad, but we got to focus on gating the right things. And from what it sounds like, that might be more assets for one company and less for another. That we've got to have that alignment around sales and marketing around what we're trying to accomplish. And Jaime, you stated that, but we didn't get a chance to dig into that. So I'm going to let that be my last question, is how does that alignment align to the gating strategy? If you can dig into that a little bit more for us, because sales marketing alignment, or that divide, has been a hot topic for me lately as well.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of dependencies around defining your gating strategy. And I think every company needs to look at where they are in the market, what their position is in the market. Like if I sold a product that 99% of my TAM used, 99% of the people know who I am, and so on and so forth, maybe gating doesn't work. I don't need to gate stuff. And I can just open it up and be this altruistic content community creator and say, here's all this wonderful content to fully support the point of view that I am still the best company out there to do business with. Now, when you're not, now in our case, and frankly, in the case I've been in marketing for 15, 20 years now, which is we need to drive revenue from the content we're developing. And there's a lot of debate and arguments to be made around how closely you can attach revenue to content, to the execution. But in terms of the sales and marketing alignment and what's asked of sales, in a lot of the situations I've been, marketing is to some degree a vendor or an agency for sales to supply them with a funnel of leads for them to close and to work. Now, obviously, there's the marketing and the branding and all that stuff that's different. But in the context of demand generation, lead generation, that's the job of marketing. So if you're aligned on the goals and sales expectation of marketing is, I want leads from you, and I want to drive revenue from the stuff and the investments you're making, well, then that's going to inform how I approach my gating strategy and my content strategy. And before I joined Fortinet, the decision was made to open up all the content. And you can look at our reporting and say, look, they decided here to open up all the content, whatever, 2018, 2019. And you can see our conversion rate from our website declining. And basically all the conversions were either contact us or give me a demo. And literally our conversion rate was cut in half. Obviously, right? Because you're no longer downloading white papers and things like that. But revenue generated from leads from the website was also cut in half.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at, we implemented a hybrid approach now where it's like some gated, some not gated, and you can see our conversion rate on our website is the highest it's ever been in the history of our website. And we are looking at like, here's the non-gated stuff. What are the outcomes from non-gated stuff? And matching that to opportunities that are created. And you can see it's like converting at less than 1%. Because we've created ways of tracking web behavior to opportunities and things like that. Pretty crazy stuff that, on a one-on-one, not recorded, I'm happy to share. But we've been able to track that. And the conversion rate on some of this free stuff is super low. And I'm not talking conversion like downloaded content and create a sales opportunity. I'm talking like anybody downloads this piece of content, never becomes a lead or an opportunity for us. Whereas when you look at the gated stuff, obviously, like super high in the tens and almost hundreds of thousands of opportunities are created from, or I don't want to say created by the gated content, but the people who download gated content at a significantly higher rate are engaged with our sales organization, right? So I think when you're looking at it from a numbers perspective and you're looking at it from an alignment to sales and what outcomes and what language they're speaking, I think it helps you start figuring out where to draw that line.
I have two thoughts on that. So first of all, one is, yes, your site conversion and your lead volume and the leads converting in the pipeline, absolutely critical. You have to balance that with SEO. The company I mentioned previously, 80 gated assets or 80% of gated assets, their SEO was terrible. And when we ungated, the vast majority of those assets, our SEO went through the roof, right? And so it didn't, we had to pick the right places to get people into our lead funnel, this list building, hand off to sales. But you also have to balance with SEO. My second thought is on what you asked, Brandi, around the sales alignment piece of that. I think the ABM piece versus the kind of general inbound funnel, as long as you're clear with your sales teams on which funnel you're creating, is it an inbound funnel of leads versus an ABM funnel where you're working on nurturing accounts, and everybody agrees to that. So there's no finger pointing, at the end of the quarter when you're looking at pipeline and revenue and, how we're doing against our target list versus our inbound funnel. As long as you're really, really aligned around that, and how you're using both strategies in the appropriate place in the appropriate way, you should be good. But you got to be making sure that everybody understands the data, the metrics, and what you're going to see from those two type of funnels and approaches. And everybody's good with that strategy and that go forward. Because the last thing you want is the end of the quarter, sales pointing back and saying it's marketing's fault.
Like that never happens.
Never. Never.
Well, talking about our challenges is just the first step. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So in traditional therapy, the therapist gives the client some homework. But here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So I'd love for each of you to give us your one thing that people can do. So if anyone who is listening is struggling with giving their team direction on what their form strategy, their gated content strategy should be, what would you advise as their first step?
Yep. Okay. My thing is understand your content portfolio and your content strategy and really pick out those things you think are the high quality, high intent pieces that are going to be the anchor of your campaigns. What is your anchor? Once you know that, then it's really easy to decide your gating strategy.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome.
For me, I think as with all things, there's a spectrum. And if you're working in a business that requires a large scale versus, you only need a few dozen customers a quarter, I think that impacts how you would design your strategy. But in terms of an advice, for me, it's about the metrics and really honing in on what's working and what's not working and where to draw that line. But the advice piece is don't overdo it. I frankly look at like two numbers that help guide directionally where we're making decisions. I think if you start getting too granular, especially for B2B, I don't know that there's enough volume to provide statistical significance for you to make real decisions based on like the 3 pieces of content with the 40 visitors it got, and all of a sudden deciding that's the best thing I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So I think I lean on the side of oversimplification in terms of some of the data points to give directional feedback and guidance and decisions we're making. Obviously, there's a team of people who are, diving in even deeper to find some of the insights and the nuance. But for me, it's simplify, and those simple metrics will also help you monitor and understand what's working and what's not working, and you can catch things much quicker that way.
Perfect. So we're going to anchor. We're going to, figure out our anchor content and build our form strategy from there and hone in on the metrics, and just a few of them. Well, I have enjoyed our discussion so much, but that's our time for today. Thank you both for joining me. I am excited to hear what other people think and whether they are on Team Gate or Team Not. But again, thank you guys for joining me, and thank everyone for joining us today. I hope that you have enjoyed my conversation with Wendy and Jaime. I can't believe we're already at the end. We will see you next time.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.